Richard Widmark wasn't just another actor. He was a real legend from old Hollywood movies. His amazing acting helped make the golden age of movies. But behind all the fame was a man who had lots of problems. From a tiny town in Minnesota to the bright lights of Hollywood, his trip wasn't easy at all. Do you know what Richard Widmark went through to become successful? If you don't, you're in the right place. Hey, my name is Mr. Heyman, and today we will talk about Richard Widmark naming the 5 actors he hated the most. But before we start, if you're a fan of Richard Widmark or love old cowboy movies, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We share cool stories about cowboy stars and old Hollywood famous people. Richard Widmark was born in the small town of Sunrise, Minnesota, but his family didn't stay there very long. In one year, they moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where his dad, Carl Henry Widmark, got a new job selling things by traveling around. Not long after they moved, Richard's mom, Ethel May, had his younger brother Donald on July 25, 1918. The two brothers became really close friends right away and stayed that way their whole lives. Richard always said he loved movies because of his Scottish grandma, who really liked cowboy star Tom Mix. She would take young Richard to see movies 2 or even 3 times every week, starting when he was just 4 years old, making him love movies forever. The family moved around a lot because of Carl's job, but they finally stayed in Princeton, Illinois. There, Carl bought a bakery and called it Henry's Bakery. The family lived in the apartment upstairs from the shop, finally finding a place they could call home. Richard Widmark went to Princeton High School, where he was a smart student, played football, and even became class president in his last year. But during his 3rd year, his parents, Carl and Ethel, split up. Ethel stayed in Princeton to take care of Richard and his brother until they finished school. Richard finished high school in 1932 and went to Lake Forest College with a scholarship, planning to become a lawyer. While at Lake Forest, Richard kept playing football and came in 3rd place in a big speech contest for the whole state. He also started acting in college plays. Even though he was shy about saying he liked acting, he was scared people would think it was weird. But his love for acting on stage grew fast. The biggest change came when he met Aurora Jean Hazelwood, another drama student who also wanted to be an actor. She became the love of his life. Richard graduated in 1936 and was asked to stay at Lake Forest to help teach drama and speech classes. He stayed for 2 years, but in 1938 he packed his bags and went to New York City to try radio acting because a friend offered to help him. At the same time, Jean Hazelwood was also in New York studying at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. Richard soon got parts in radio shows, including A Jenny's Real Life Stories, and his career took off as he ran between different studios. On April 5, 1942, just a few months after the U.S. started fighting in World War II, Richard and Jean got married in her hometown of Evanston, Illinois. Richard always said he never even talked to another woman in a romantic way after meeting Jean. "I happen to like my wife a lot," he once said. Their marriage lasted 55 years, with no Hollywood drama or scandals. Richard tried to join the army during the war, but they said no because he had a hole in his eardrum. Meanwhile, his brother Donald got drafted and sent to Europe. In 1943, something terrible happened when Donald's plane got shot down over the Netherlands. He was the only one from his crew who lived and spent over a year in a German prison. Even though he made it home, his health never got better. He had really bad headaches and in 1951 became partially paralyzed. Sadly, on December 22, 1955, Donald died from a brain tumor when he was just 37 years old. Richard did everything he could to take care of his brother, and often said the government didn't understand how much Donald was really suffering. Back in 1943, while Richard Widmark and his wife Jane were worried about Jean's brother, Donald making it through the war, Richard was starting to build his career. He acted in his first Broadway play called Kiss and Tell and started performing for American soldiers with the American Theater Wing. By then, Richard was already making good money from radio and stage work. In 1945, Richard and Jean had their only child, Anne Heath Widmark, born on July 25th. Soon after, Richard got a life-changing offer from 20th Century Fox boss Darryl F. Zanuck. He was asked to play a mean killer named Tommy Udo in Kiss of Death, starring Victor Mature. But the movie's director, Henry Hathaway, didn't think Richard was right for the part. He thought Richard looked too smart with his high forehead to be a believable killer. However, Zanuck said no and Richard got the part. Hathaway wasn't happy and made filming hard for him. Richard only wanted the role because it was being filmed in New York. Surprisingly, this was his very first movie, and in the very first scene he ever filmed, he made a scary impression. As Tommy Udo, he famously pushed an old woman in a wheelchair down some stairs and gave a wild, creepy laugh that would become famous in movie history. That scene got him nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor and won him a Golden Globe as the most promising new male actor. Richard joked, "I thought this acting thing was easy. I haven't won anything since." He also said that when he saw himself on screen for the first time, he was horrified and said he felt like shooting himself. But audiences were hooked. They loved to hate his character, and Fox gave him a 7-year contract, even though he had signed a bad deal just to get the Tommy Udo role. In 1948, he starred in Yellow Sky with Gregory Peck and Ann Baxter. That same year he also appeared in Roadhouse with Celeste Holm and The Street with No Name with Lloyd Nolan and Barbara Lawrence. The next year, in 1949, he acted in Down to the Sea in Ships with Lionel Barrymore. By 1950, the studio gave him 2 big projects. The first was Panic in the Streets, directed by Elia Kazan, an old Broadway friend who had actually told Richard to try out for Kiss of Death back in 1947. Even though the film had stars like Jack Palance and Zero Mostel, it lost money, mostly, because it was filmed on location in New Orleans, which made it too expensive. Next, Richard starred in No Way Out, a movie about racism with Sidney Poitier and Linda Darnell. Richard played a racist named Ray Biddle, a role he didn't want to take. The studio made him do it. After each intense scene, Richard would say sorry to Poitier and say, "Sid, you know this is just acting, right?" Poitier told him it was okay, and said, "Dick, I get it. I'm an actor too." They became close friends, and Sidney later said Richard was the first person in Hollywood to invite him to dinner, something really kind that meant a lot to him at that time. Before talking about the rest of Richard Widmark's life, let's talk about the main topic of the video. In 1951, Richard Widmark appeared in Halls of Montezuma, a World War II movie set on a Japanese-held island. He starred with his old radio friend Carl Malden as well as Jack Palance, Richard Boone, and a young Robert Wagner, who got his first credited role in this film. The next year, in 1952, Widmark shared the screen with Marilyn Monroe in Don't Bother to Knock. Richard once described Marilyn as a fragile soul, like a hurt bird. She really wanted fame, but was scared of everything around her. She often hid in her dressing room for hours, and by late afternoon, the crew would beg her to come out so they could finally go home. She had trouble remembering her lines, and during filming, you'd think her acting was a mess. But once the movie was edited and up on the big screen, she looked amazing. Even though people said Marilyn often had romantic relationships with her co-stars, Richard said, "Not with me, she didn't even flirt." In 1954, he worked again with Robert Wagner, this time with Spencer Tracy in Broken Lance. This film marked the end of Widmark's 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. At 40 years old, he felt it was time for a change. He was tired from jumping from one movie to the next without a break. More importantly, he thought he could make better money as an independent actor. His daughter Anne shared that her father was always a family man who liked quiet life at home. Around this time, Richard and his family were living on a peaceful ranch in the San Fernando Valley. Wanting more creative control, Widmark started his own movie production company, naming it Heath Productions, after Anne's middle name. But 1956 brought personal sadness. His dear mother, Ethel May, died just 1 year after the death of his brother, Donald. Even though Widmark rarely spoke publicly about his Hollywood enemies, people who worked with him and other actors over the years whispered about the actors who made him angry. Whether it was their big egos, their laziness, or their showing off, Widmark had no patience for those who didn't take acting as seriously as he did. And according to those who knew him, well, there were 5 actors he just couldn't stand, no matter how famous they were. Number 1. Frank Sinatra. The chairman of the board may have charmed the world, but he didn't impress Richard Widmark. The two worked together on The Detective in 1968, and the experience reportedly left Widmark really angry. Sinatra's casual attitude toward acting, his habit of showing up late, and his demand to shoot scenes quickly with little preparation were the complete opposite of Widmark's disciplined approach. One crew member later said, "Richard thought Frank was all charm, no commitment. To Widmark, acting was sacred. To Sinatra, it seemed like just another job." Number 2. Marlon Brando. Widmark had mixed feelings about Brando. He admitted the younger actor had talent, even brilliance, but couldn't stand his method acting tricks. Brando's unpredictable behavior, his refusal to memorize lines, and his constant making things up annoyed Widmark to no end. While they never worked together directly, Widmark was once quoted as saying, "Some actors need chaos to create. I prefer focus." That subtle jab many believed was aimed right at Brando. Number 3. Tony Curtis. During the filming of The Long Ships in 1964, Widmark and Curtis were co-stars, but far from friends. Curtis was known for his vanity, often spending more time in the makeup chair than with the script. He treated the set like a fashion show, while Widmark came ready to work. Their behind-the-scenes tension was obvious to everyone. One production assistant said Widmark didn't hate Curtis for who he was, but for who he pretended to be. To Widmark, Curtis was more style than substance. Number 4. Robert Mitchum. Laid back, drunk a lot, and famously didn't care. Mitchum was Hollywood's cool cat. But to Widmark, that not-caring attitude was almost like being disrespectful. Mitchum often bragged about how little he prepared for roles, once saying, "I just show up, hit my mark, and say the lines." Widmark, who treated every role like a battle to be won, found this attitude really annoying. Although the two appeared in the same era of films, their ways of thinking couldn't have been more different. "You don't coast through greatness," Widmark once muttered to a friend after watching Mitchum on screen. Number 5. Kirk Douglas. Perhaps the most shocking name on the list. Both were tough, intense, and commanding actors. But maybe that was the problem. Too much alike. Widmark thought Douglas was a scene stealer, constantly trying to upstage others. His booming voice, theatrical expressions, and need to dominate every frame rubbed Widmark the wrong way. There were rumors that Widmark once turned down a major role opposite Douglas, saying, "There's only room for one storm in a scene, and Kirk brings the whole hurricane." Despite these personal problems, Richard Widmark kept things professional on the surface. He was never the kind of man to air dirty laundry in public or feed gossip magazines. But those close to him say he believed that actors had a responsibility to the audience, to the script, and to each other. When someone disrespected that, whether through ego or laziness, he took it personally. In 1957, Richard Widmark starred with Richard Basehart and June Lockhart in Time Limit. Just a year later, he appeared with Doris Day and Gig Young in The Tunnel of Love. That same year, he also teamed up with Robert Taylor and Patricia Owens for The Law and Jake Wade. By then, Widmark had become a familiar face and a well-known name in Hollywood. When someone asked him if fame had affected his privacy, he simply said, "I don't care how well-known an actor is. He can live a normal life if he wants to." In 1960, Widmark took on the role of Jim Bowie in John Wayne's production of The Alamo. Interestingly, Wayne originally wanted him to play Colonel William Travis, not Bowie. He even told the 5'10", Widmark, "You're not big enough to play Jim Bowie." But Widmark confidently replied, "I will be," and he proved it. The following year in 1961, Widmark starred in the western Two Rode Together with James Stewart and Shirley Jones. He shared that most of the time on set. Director John Ford and Jimmy Stewart were busy arguing, mainly about the old beat-up cowboy hat Stewart insisted on wearing, a hat he'd used in several other westerns. Despite the behind-the-scenes tension, Shirley Jones later admitted that Richard Widmark was the only leading man she ever truly fell in love with. "He and Stewart were both so kind and protective of me," she said. "Though nothing ever came of my feelings. Maybe that's why I loved him." That same year, Widmark also played the American prosecutor in Judgment at Nuremberg, starring alongside legends like Spencer Tracy and Burt Lancaster. In 1962, he joined a powerhouse cast including John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, Gregory Peck, Debbie Reynolds, Carol Baker, and Henry Fonda in the epic film How the West Was Won. The movie had a massive $15 million budget, but went on to earn the studio over $50 million. By 1964, Widmark and his wife Jean were enjoying life on their peaceful 20-acre estate in Connecticut. In 1966, he returned to the screen with Alvarez Kelly, a Civil War drama co-starring William Holden and Janice Rule. The following year, he starred in The Way West with Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas. Sadly, just 2 years after Alvarez Kelly, Widmark received heartbreaking news. His father Carl had passed away in New Orleans at the age of 70. In 1974, Richard Widmark appeared in Murder on the Orient Express, alongside stars like Lauren Bacall and many others. Later in 1982, he acted in Hanky Panky, a film directed by his friend Sidney Poitier, and starred alongside Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner. By 1987, at the age of 72, Widmark admitted that filmmaking no longer excited him. He said, "I've realized in my old age that making movies just irritates me. I've only got a few years left, and I don't want to spend 12 hours on set just to shoot." 2 minutes of footage. Throughout his career, Widmark appeared in over 70 films, far too many to list, but he was especially known for his roles in westerns. That same year, in an interview with Parade magazine, he shared a weird story. A woman once slapped him in the street, calling him a little squirt, while another time a large man knocked him right out of his chair at a restaurant. "This acting business is something else," he laughed. When asked if he was smart with money, like some stars who lost it all, Widmark joked, "No, I'm just cheap." In February 1990, at age 75, he received one of his highest honors, the D.W. Griffith Lifetime Achievement Award. His longtime friend, Sidney Poitier, presented it to him. Widmark was touched and said, "Sid, I can't believe you came all the way to California just for this." Poitier replied, "For you, Dick, I would have walked." But that same year brought heartbreak. Richard's beloved wife, Jean, was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. After her diagnosis, he stepped away from acting to care for her full-time. He only returned once more in 1991 for the film True Colors, with John Cusack and Imogen Stubbs, just to fulfill a commitment. The next 7 years were deeply painful for Richard and their daughter Anne, as they watched Jean slowly fade away. March 2, 1997, Jean passed away from Alzheimer's in Santa Barbara, California, leaving behind a grieving family and a husband who had devoted everything to her in her final years. Just a few months after Jean passed away, Richard decided to sell their beloved 80-acre ranch in Hidden Valley. Without her, it just didn't feel the same. Then 2 years later, on September 27, 1999, Richard, who was 84 at the time, married 71-year-old actress Susan Blanchard, a longtime family friend. Richard once said Susan had always been kind to Jean. The couple settled down in Roxbury, Connecticut. In 2002, Richard was honored with an induction into the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, a proud moment in his later years. But by 2007, his health had started to decline, and a fractured vertebrae only made things worse. On March 24, 2008, at the age of 93, Richard Widmark passed away peacefully at his home in Roxbury. Friends remembered him as a gentle and honorable man, and fittingly he left the world just as he had lived, quietly,